Hello and welcome back. Today, we will learn English through the extraordinary story of Alexander the Great, a man who conquered empires, a king who never lost a battle, and a ruler whose ambition changed the world forever. But this story does not begin with victory. It begins with death. In the city of Babylon, thousands of soldiers stood outside a royal chamber. Inside, the most powerful man in the world lay helpless in bed. His body burned with fever. His voice had almost disappeared. For years, these soldiers had followed him across deserts, mountains, and battlefields. They had watched him defeat kings and destroy empires. Many believed Alexander could never be beaten, yet now, at only 32 years old, he was dying. Outside the room, fear began to spread. Alexander ruled a vast empire stretching from Greece and Egypt to the edge of India. But there was one question nobody could answer. Who would rule after him? How had a young prince from a small kingdom conquered the known world before the age of 30? Why did he continue marching even after defeating the greatest empire on earth? And why did his empire begin to fall apart almost as soon as he died? To answer those questions, we must travel back many years, back to Macedonia, back to a royal court filled with ambition, danger, and dreams of greatness. There, a young boy watched grown men struggle to control a wild black horse. Everyone else saw a dangerous animal. The boy saw something completely different. That moment would reveal the mind of Alexander long before he became a king, and it would show why he would one day believe that no challenge was impossible. Alexander was born in 356 BC in the Kingdom of Macedonia. His father was King Philip II. His mother was Olympias. From an early age, Alexander listened to stories about heroes, warriors, and gods. Among all those stories, one hero inspired him the most: Achilles, the legendary warrior of the Trojan War. Alexander did not see these stories as simple entertainment. He believed they were showing him his future. Even as a child, he wanted to do something great. He wanted people to remember his name. One day, a horse trader arrived at the royal court. He brought a large black horse. The animal was powerful, beautiful, and extremely dangerous. Its name was Bucephalus. King Philip's best riders tried to control it. They failed. The horse kicked wildly. It pulled away from everyone who approached. Several riders were thrown to the ground. The court became frustrated. Some men called the horse useless. Others said it was too dangerous to keep. King Philip was ready to send it away. But Alexander had been watching carefully. He noticed something strange. The horse was not angry. It was frightened. Every time Bucephalus moved, it saw its own shadow beside it. The moving shadow made the animal panic. Alexander stepped forward. He was still only a boy. The older men laughed. They did not believe a child could succeed where experienced riders had failed. Even King Philip warned him to stay back. But Alexander ignored them. Slowly, he approached the horse. He turned Bucephalus toward the sun. The shadow disappeared behind the animal. For the first time, the horse became calm. Alexander spoke softly. He touched the horse gently. Then, in one quick movement, he climbed onto its back. The entire court fell silent. Bucephalus began to run. For a moment, everyone thought Alexander would fall. But he remained calm. He guided the horse across the field. Then he turned around and rode back toward the crowd. When he returned, the court erupted in cheers. King Philip looked at his son with amazement. He understood something important. Alexander had not won through strength. He had won because he saw what others could not. According to the famous story, Philip said, "My son, find a kingdom equal to your ambition. Macedonia is too small for you." Those words sounded like praise, but they also planted a dangerous idea. From that day forward, Alexander began to believe that no kingdom would ever be large enough, and soon, one of the greatest teachers in history would help shape the mind of the future conqueror. King Philip was proud of his son's courage. But he knew courage alone was not enough. A future king also needed wisdom, so he invited one of the greatest thinkers in Greece to become Alexander's teacher. His name was Aristotle. For several years, Aristotle taught the young prince. He taught philosophy, science, politics, medicine, history, and the art of asking questions. Alexander learned about distant lands, strange animals, different cultures, and powerful civilizations beyond Greece. With every lesson, his world became larger, but something else was growing as well. His ambition. Among all the books Aristotle introduced to him, one stood above the rest, the Iliad, the epic story of Achilles. Alexander read it again and again. He admired Achilles more than any other hero. Achilles had a choice. He could live a long and peaceful life, or he could achieve eternal glory and be remembered forever. Alexander knew which path he preferred. He wanted greatness. He wanted fame. He wanted the world to remember his name long after he was gone. While Aristotle taught him how to think, King Philip taught him how power worked. Philip was transforming Macedonia into a military powerhouse. He strengthened the army. He trained soldiers to fight in disciplined formations. He defeated rival kingdoms, and he slowly brought much of Greece under his influence. Alexander watched everything. He admired his father, but he also competed with him. Every victory Philip achieved created a strange feeling inside Alexander, pride and jealousy. The more successful Philip became, the less world seemed left for Alexander to conquer. Then, at the age of 16, Alexander received his first real test. King Philip left Macedonia for a military campaign. For the first time, Alexander was placed in charge of the kingdom. Many enemies believed the young prince would fail. Instead, he acted quickly. He crushed a local rebellion. He secured the region, and he proved that he could lead. 2 years later, he fought beside his father at the Battle of Chaeronea. It was one of the most important battles in Greek history. During the fighting, Alexander led a cavalry attack that helped break the enemy line. The Macedonians won, and the young prince earned the respect of experienced soldiers. He was no longer just a student. He was becoming a commander. But while Alexander's reputation grew, trouble was growing inside the royal family. King Philip married another woman. Soon, rumors began to spread. What if the new queen gave birth to a son? What if Alexander lost his place as heir? The royal court became filled with tension. Arguments followed. Trust began to disappear. For the first time in his life, Alexander faced a frightening possibility. What if he never became king at all? Then, in 336 BC, everything changed. A single blade would transform his future forever. In 336 BC, King Philip attended a public celebration. Nobles, generals, and foreign guests filled the theater. It was meant to be a day of triumph. Instead, it became a day of chaos. As Philip walked through the crowd, one of his own guards rushed forward. Before anyone could react, the guard attacked. King Philip collapsed. Within moments, he was dead. Panic spread across the theater. People shouted. Some ran. Others reached for their weapons. No one knew if more attacks were coming. For Alexander, everything changed in a single moment. His father was gone, and now the throne was his. But becoming king did not make him safe. It made him a target. Alexander was only 20 years old. Many powerful men believed he was too young to rule. Some wanted to control him. Others wanted to replace him. Across Greece, old enemies saw an opportunity. Several tribes near Macedonia began preparing for rebellion. Greek cities started to whisper about independence. Many believed the young king would be weak. They were wrong. Alexander moved quickly. He secured the throne. He removed rivals who threatened his position. Then he turned his attention toward Greece. Rumors soon spread that Alexander had been killed during a campaign in the north. when the city of Thebes heard the news. Its leaders saw a chance to break free from Macedonian rule. The people of Thebes believed Alexander was far away. They believed they had time. They believed he could not stop them. But Alexander was already moving. He marched his army south at astonishing speed, day after day. His soldiers pushed forward before the people of Thebes fully understood what was happening. The Macedonian army appeared outside their walls. The city was shocked. Alexander offered them one final chance. Surrender, hand over the leaders of the rebellion, and the city would be spared. The Thebans refused. They believed they could still resist. Then the battle began. Macedonian soldiers broke through the defenses. Fighting spread through the streets. The resistance collapsed. Now Alexander faced a choice. He could show mercy, or he could send a message. He chose the second option. Most of Thebes was destroyed. Thousands died. Many survivors were sold into slavery. News of the destruction spread across Greece. The reaction was immediate. Cities that had considered rebellion suddenly changed their minds. Athens remained quiet. Other cities pledged loyalty. No one wanted to suffer the fate of Thebes. Alexander had secured Greece, but he had also revealed something important about himself. He could be intelligent, he could be brave, and when he believed his power was threatened, he could be ruthless. Now Greece was under his control. The throne was secure. The rebellions were crushed. For most kings, that would have been enough. For Alexander, it was only the beginning. Across the sea stood the Persian Empire, the richest and most powerful empire in the world. And Alexander had already decided that he would conquer it. In 334 BC, Alexander stood at the edge of the Hellespont. Behind him was Europe. Ahead of him was Asia. Across the water lay the Persian Empire. It was the largest empire in the known world. Its king, Darius III, ruled millions of people. His armies came from many different nations. His wealth seemed endless. Most rulers would have been afraid. Alexander was excited. He believed this was his destiny. With around 40,000 soldiers, he crossed into Asia. The journey had begun. Soon, he faced his first major test at the Granicus River. Persian forces waited on the opposite bank. The river was fast, the ground was steep, and the enemy was ready. Several of Alexander's generals advised caution. They suggested waiting until morning. Crossing the river under attack seemed too dangerous. Alexander refused. He feared that hesitation would look like weakness, so he ordered the attack. The Macedonian cavalry entered the water. Arrows flew through the air. Spears crashed against shields. Men and horses struggled against the current. Alexander rode at the front, as always. When he reached the opposite bank, enemy soldiers surrounded him. The fighting became desperate. One Persian warrior struck Alexander's helmet with tremendous force. Another raised his weapon for a killing blow. For a brief moment, the future of the entire campaign hung by a thread. Then a Macedonian officer named Clytus charged forward. He struck the attacker and saved Alexander's life. The king survived. The battle continued. Slowly, the Macedonians pushed forward. The Persian line began to break. By the end of the day, Alexander had won. It was a major victory, but it also taught him something dangerous. The greater the risk, the greater the reward, again and again. This lesson would shape his decisions. After Granicus, Alexander continued deeper into Persian territory. Some cities surrendered without a fight, others resisted. Those that resisted often paid a heavy price. Alexander was not simply chasing glory, he was systematically weakening Persian power. Then, during his journey, he encountered a famous legend. In the city of Gordium stood an ancient knot. It was known as the Gordian knot. According to the legend, whoever untied it would rule Asia. Many people had tried. No one had succeeded. Alexander studied the knot. Then he did something unexpected. Instead of trying to untie it, he drew his sword. With one powerful strike, He cut straight through it. The crowd watched in amazement. Whether the story is true or not, it perfectly captured Alexander's personality. When he faced a problem, he rarely followed the normal path. He created his own. Soon, a much greater challenge appeared. King Darius himself was gathering an army. For the first time, the ruler of Persia was coming to stop him. The two kings were finally moving toward each other, and one of history's most famous confrontations was about to begin. After the victory at Granicus, Alexander continued moving deeper into Asia. City after city fell under his control. Some surrendered peacefully, others fought and were defeated. Meanwhile, King Darius III was preparing his response. The ruler of Persia could no longer ignore the young Macedonian king. He gathered a massive army. Soldiers arrived from every corner of the empire. The two armies finally met near a place called Issus. At first glance, the situation favored Persia. Darius had more men, more resources, and a much larger empire behind him. But there was one problem. The battlefield was narrow. The Persian army could not fully use its numbers. Alexander saw the opportunity immediately. As the battle began, both sides pushed forward. The noise was overwhelming. Shouting soldiers, clashing weapons, galloping horses. Dust filled the air. Alexander rode with his elite cavalry on the right side of the battlefield, as always. He led from the front. He did not hide behind his soldiers. He fought beside them. Then came the moment that changed everything. Alexander spotted Darius. The Persian king stood at the center of his army, protected by guards, surrounded by thousands of soldiers. Most commanders would have attacked the weaker parts of the enemy line. Alexander chose a different target. He charged directly toward Darius. The attack was fast, violent, and unexpected. As Alexander's cavalry broke through the Persian defenses, panic began to spread. Darius watched the Macedonian king moving closer and closer. The danger was real. For the second time in his life, Alexander was risking everything. And once again, it worked. Darius made a decision. He turned his chariot and fled. The moment the Persian king ran, the battle was over. Across the battlefield, Persian soldiers saw their ruler escaping. Their confidence collapsed. Many threw down their weapons. Others tried to flee. The army began to disintegrate. Alexander had achieved an extraordinary victory. He had defeated the most powerful ruler in the world, and he had done it with a much smaller force. The victory changed everything. Darius escaped, but his family did not. Alexander captured the Persian king's mother, wife, and children. Many expected him to treat them harshly. Instead, he surprised everyone. He treated them with respect. He promised they would not be harmed. The decision improved his reputation. He appeared powerful, but also merciful. Soon, stories about Alexander spread across the empire. Some saw him as a conqueror. Others began to see him as a legitimate ruler. Yet Alexander was not satisfied. Darius was still alive. The Persian Empire still existed, and the greatest prize of all was still waiting. Far to the south lay Egypt, one of the richest lands in the ancient world, and Alexander was already moving toward it. After defeating Darius at Issus, Alexander faced an important decision. He could chase the Persian king immediately, but he chose another path. He marched south. His goal was to control the eastern Mediterranean coast. If he captured the major ports, Persia would lose much of its naval power. Cities fell under his control. Some welcomed him, others resisted. Eventually, Alexander entered Egypt. The reaction was very different. For years, the Egyptians had lived under Persian rule. Many were unhappy with their foreign rulers. When Alexander arrived, he was not treated as an enemy. He was welcomed as a liberator. Crowds gathered to see him. Priests honored him. Local leaders accepted his authority. For the first time, Alexander experienced something new. He was not simply feared, he was admired. Soon, he was crowned Pharaoh of Egypt. This title carried enormous meaning. In Egyptian tradition, a pharaoh was more than a king. He was seen as a sacred ruler, a bridge between humanity and the gods. Alexander accepted the honor, and perhaps, deep inside, he enjoyed it more than he admitted. Not long afterward, he made one of the most important decisions of his life, near the Mediterranean coast. He selected the location for a new city. He named it Alexandria. The city would become one of the greatest centers of learning, trade, and culture in the ancient world. More than 2,000 years later, it still exists. It remains one of Alexander's most lasting achievements. But the young conqueror wanted more than cities. He wanted answers, so he traveled deep into the desert. His destination was the Oracle of Siwa, one of the most famous religious sites in the ancient world. The journey was difficult. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. The heat was intense. Water was precious. Yet Alexander continued forward. He believed the oracle might reveal something important about his destiny. When he finally arrived, the priests welcomed him. Exactly what was said remains a mystery. Ancient writers gave different accounts. Some claimed the priests greeted him as the son of Zeus. Others believed the message was misunderstood. The truth may never be known. But one thing seems certain. Alexander left the oracle changed. His confidence grew stronger. His belief in his own destiny became even greater. The young king, who once dreamed of glory, was beginning to see himself as something extraordinary, perhaps even chosen. Yet while Alexander was gaining fame in Egypt, Darius was not sitting still. Far to the east, the Persian king was gathering another army, an even larger army. The final confrontation was approaching. One battle would decide the fate of an empire. One battle would determine who ruled the known world, and Alexander was marching directly toward it. In 331 BC, Alexander marched east once again. Ahead of him stood the final army of the Persian Empire. King Darius had learned from his earlier defeats. This time, he chose the battlefield himself. The location was a wide, open plain near Gaugamela. Unlike Issus, there would be plenty of space. The Persian army could finally use its superior numbers. Darius gathered soldiers from across his empire, cavalry, infantry, archers, and even war chariots equipped with sharp blades attached to their wheels. When Alexander's officers saw the enemy army, many were shocked. The Persians seemed endless. One general suggested a night attack. He believed it would increase their chances of victory. Alexander refused. His answer was simple: I will not steal my victory. He wanted to win in daylight. He wanted the world to see exactly who had defeated Persia. The night before the battle, many soldiers struggled to sleep. They knew what was at stake. If they lost, everything would be over. The next morning, Alexander carefully studied the battlefield. He understood that charging directly into the Persian center would be a mistake. So he did something unexpected. Instead of moving straight forward, he slowly moved his army to the right. Darius reacted immediately. He ordered part of his army to follow. As both sides shifted position, the Persian line began to stretch, slowly, almost invisibly. A gap started to appear. Alexander had been waiting for exactly this moment. Then the battle exploded into action. Persian chariots charged forward. Their blades were designed to tear through enemy formations, but Macedonian soldiers remained calm. They opened small gaps in their lines. The chariots passed through harmlessly. Then the soldiers closed in from both sides. The Persian weapon had failed. Now Alexander launched his real attack. He formed his cavalry into a wedge, a sharp triangle, like the point of a spear. At the front rode Alexander himself. The cavalry surged forward, straight toward the opening in the Persian line. The ground shook beneath the horses. Dust filled the air. Men screamed. Weapons crashed together. Alexander drove deeper and deeper toward the center, and once again, he was heading directly toward Darius. The Persian king watched the attack approaching, closer, closer, closer. Then history repeated itself. Darius turned and fled for the second time. The ruler of Persia abandoned the battlefield. The effect was immediate. Panic spread through the Persian army. Entire sections of the line began to collapse. Thousands ran for their lives. Others surrendered. By sunset, the battle was over. Alexander had won. The Persian Empire had lost. The greatest empire on earth was finished. Soon afterward, Alexander into Babylon. Its gates opened before him. Then came Susa, then Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persian power. The conqueror from Macedonia now possessed unimaginable wealth, gold, silver, treasures collected over generations. At only 25 years old, Alexander had achieved what many thought was impossible. He had conquered the Persian Empire. Most men would have celebrated. Most men would have gone home. Alexander did neither, because for him, victory was never enough, and that would soon become his greatest weakness. After the fall of Persia, Alexander stood at the peak of his power. He had achieved what no Macedonian king had ever imagined. His enemies were defeated. His treasury was overflowing with wealth. His name was known across the world. He could have returned home as a legend. But Alexander was not interested in returning home. He wanted more. Far to the east lay lands that few Greeks had ever seen. New kingdoms, new rivers, new horizons. And Alexander intended to reach them all. So the army marched again. Month after month, they moved deeper into Asia. The journey became harder. The mountains were steeper. The deserts were harsher. The distances grew longer. Many soldiers had not seen their families for years, yet Alexander kept moving forward. As the campaign continued, something else began to change. Alexander himself. He started wearing some Persian royal clothing. He welcomed Persian nobles into important positions. He encouraged cooperation between Macedonians and Persians. From a political perspective, the decision made sense. His empire was enormous. He could not govern millions of people by force alone. He needed their loyalty, but many Macedonian officers saw things differently. They believed they had conquered Persia. They did not want to become more like the people they had defeated. Some began to feel uncomfortable around their king. The Alexander they once knew seemed to be disappearing. The young commander who had shared their hardships now appeared more distant, more royal, more powerful. Some even believed he was beginning to think of himself as a god. Tension slowly grew inside the army. Then came a tragedy. One night, Alexander attended a banquet with his officers. Wine flowed freely. Stories were shared. As the evening continued, the conversation became heated. Among the guests was Clytus, the same man who had once saved Alexander's life at the Granicus River. For years, he had been one of the king's most trusted companions. But on this night, an argument erupted. Clytus criticized Alexander. He accused him of becoming arrogant. He reminded him that many victories belonged not only to the king, but also to the soldiers who had fought beside him. Alexander became angry. The argument grew louder. Neither man would back down. The room fell silent. Everyone could feel the tension. Then, in a moment of rage, Alexander grabbed a weapon and struck Clytus. The room froze. Clytus collapsed. He was dead. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Alexander stared at the man lying on the floor. The man who had once saved his life. The man he had just killed. Almost immediately, his anger vanished, and regret took its place. For days, Alexander blamed himself. He refused food. He isolated himself, but nothing could change what had happened. Clytus was gone. The incident revealed a painful truth. Alexander could conquer cities. He could defeat kings. He could overcome impossible odds, but he could not always control himself. And the farther east he traveled, the heavier that burden became. Soon, he would enter India. There, he would face some of the most difficult battles of his life. And for the first time, he would discover that even Alexander the Great had limits. After years of conquest, Alexander entered India. For many of his soldiers, it felt like another world. The rivers were enormous. The forests were dense. The air was hot and humid. Everything seemed unfamiliar. But the greatest surprise was still waiting: war elephants. Most Macedonian soldiers had never seen anything like them. These animals were massive. They could carry warriors on their backs. They could crush men beneath their feet. And they terrified horses. Soon, Alexander faced one of the strongest rulers in the region, King Porus. Unlike many kings Alexander had encountered, Porus refused to surrender. He prepared for battle, and he intended to fight. The two armies faced each other across the Hydaspes River. Porus positioned his forces on the opposite bank, including dozens of war elephants. Crossing directly would be dangerous. Porus expected Alexander to attack. Alexander knew that, so he used deception. For days, he moved troops along the river. One day they marched north. The next day they marched south. Again and again. Each movement forced Porus to prepare for an attack. Eventually, the Indian king became accustomed to it. He stopped reacting. That was exactly what Alexander wanted. One stormy night, Alexander secretly led part of his army upstream, far from the main camp, under cover of darkness. They crossed the river. By the time Porus realized what had happened, Alexander was already on his side. The battle began. Rain soaked the battlefield. Mud covered the ground. Horses struggled to move. Then the elephants charged. The sight was terrifying. Some Macedonian soldiers froze. Others were thrown into confusion. The huge animals smashed into the battle lines. For a moment, it seemed as if Alexander's army might finally break. But the Macedonians adapted. They attacked from the sides. They targeted the elephant drivers. They created openings. Slowly, the momentum changed. Some wounded elephants became frightened. They turned around and charged back into their own army. Chaos spread through Porus's forces. The battle continued for hours. Eventually, Alexander gained the advantage. The Indian army collapsed. King Porus was captured, but even in defeat, he remained proud. When Alexander asked how he wished to be treated, Porus gave a famous reply: "Treat me like a king." Alexander admired the answer. He respected courage, even in an enemy. Instead of removing Porus from power, he allowed him to continue ruling. It was one of the most generous decisions of Alexander's career, but victory came with a cost. Many soldiers had died. Many more were exhausted. And around this time, Alexander suffered a personal loss. Bucephalus, the horse that had carried him through countless battles, the horse he had loved since childhood, died. Alexander was devastated. To honor his old companion, he founded a city named after him. But grief was not the only problem. The army was reaching its limit. For years, the soldiers had marched across continents. They had crossed deserts, climbed mountains, fought endless battles, and now Alexander wanted to go even farther east. His men did not. When they reached the Hyphasis River, the army finally refused. The soldiers would march no farther. Alexander was furious. He argued. He waited. He hoped they would change their minds. They did not. For the first time in his life, Alexander had been stopped, not by an enemy king, not by a powerful army, but by the exhaustion of his own men. Reluctantly, he accepted their decision. The march east was over. The journey home had begun. But an even greater tragedy was waiting ahead. Alexander had finally agreed to turn back, but he did not choose the easiest route home. Part of the army traveled by sea. Alexander led the rest through the Gedrosian Desert. It was one of the harshest places on earth. The land seemed endless. The heat was unbearable. Water was scarce. Food became harder to find with each passing day. At first, the soldiers remained confident. They had survived countless battles. They had defeated kings and empires. Surely they could survive a desert. They were wrong. Day after day, The march became more difficult. Men collapsed from exhaustion. Animals died from thirst. Supplies disappeared. Some soldiers wandered away in search of water and never returned. Others simply fell beside the path. The desert showed no mercy. There were no enemies to fight, no cities to capture, no victories to celebrate, only heat, hunger, and death. One day, a small group of soldiers found a little water. It was barely enough to fill a helmet. They carried it to Alexander. Their king was suffering just like everyone else. His lips were dry. His body was exhausted. He desperately needed water. The soldiers offered it to him. Alexander looked around. He saw thousands of thirsty men. He knew there was not enough water for everyone. Slowly, he lifted the helmet. Then he poured the water onto the ground. The soldiers watched in silence. If they could not drink, he would not drink. The gesture inspired the army. It reminded them why they had followed him across the world. But inspiration could not save everyone. Many died before the army finally escaped the desert. When Alexander reached safer lands, he immediately began planning new campaigns. He spoke about Arabia, new trade routes, new cities, new conquests. Even after everything he had achieved, he still wanted more. Then tragedy struck again. His closest friend, Hephaestion, became ill. The two men had known each other since childhood. They had studied together, fought together, and conquered the world together. Now Hephaestion was dying. When he passed away, Alexander was devastated. Some historians believe this was the greatest personal loss of his life. For days, he mourned. He ordered grand ceremonies. Monuments were built in his friend's honor. But grief followed him everywhere. For perhaps the first time, Alexander was forced to confront a painful truth. Even the people closest to him could disappear. Even power could not stop death. Yet he continued making plans. He continued thinking about the future. Then, in Babylon, something unexpected happened. Alexander became sick. At first, the illness seemed minor, a simple fever, nothing more. But the fever did not go away. Instead, it grew worse and worse. With each passing day, the strongest man in the world became weaker. Soon, he could no longer stand, and for the first time since childhood, Alexander faced an enemy he could not fight. In Babylon, Alexander continued making plans. He spoke with his generals. He discussed future campaigns. He talked about new roads, new cities, and new lands to explore. Even after conquering the greatest empire of his age, he was still looking toward the horizon. Then the fever came. At first, nobody seemed worried. Alexander had survived countless hardships. He had recovered from wounds that would have killed most men. A simple illness did not appear dangerous, but this time was different. The fever continued. Day after day, it grew worse. Alexander's strength slowly faded. Walking became difficult. Speaking became difficult. Soon, he could no longer leave his bed. His generals gathered around him. They watched with growing concern. The man who had crossed continents on horseback could barely sit upright. Outside the palace, rumors spread quickly. Soldiers whispered among themselves. Some refused to believe the stories. Others feared the worst. How could Alexander be dying? He was only 32 years old. Many of his soldiers had followed him for more than a decade. They had crossed mountains together, survived deserts together, fought battles together. For many of them, it was impossible to imagine a world without Alexander. As the days passed, his condition worsened. The fever continued to burn through his body. His voice became weaker. His movements became slower. Eventually, he could no longer speak clearly. The generals realized something terrifying. The greatest conqueror in the world might not recover. One question suddenly became more important than any battle. Who would rule after Alexander? His empire stretched from Greece to India. Millions of people lived under his authority, but there was no clear successor. No adoutir, no obvious replacement. The uncertainty frightened everyone. Some generals worried about the future. Others quietly thought about power. The empire Alexander had built depended heavily on one man, and that man was dying. Finally, the soldiers demanded to see him. They wanted proof. They wanted one final glimpse of the king they had followed across the world. Alexander agreed. On buon. The soldiers entered the chamber. The room was silent. Many struggled to hold back tears. Others simply stared. This was not the unstoppable warrior they remembered. This was a young man weakened by illness, a king facing his final battle. As each soldier passed by, Alexander raised his hand, a small gesture, but enough. No speech was necessary. No grand farewell was needed. The soldiers understood. Their king was saying goodbye. Soon afterward, Alexander the Great died in Babylon. The year was 323 BC. He was only 32 years old. No one knows exactly what caused his death. Some historians believe it was disease. Others have suggested different explanations. The truth remains uncertain. But one fact was clear. The man who had never lost a battle was gone, and the empire he created was about to face its greatest crisis. Alexander's death did not bring peace. It created a new struggle. For years, his generals had fought beside him. They had crossed deserts, won battles, and helped build the largest empire of their age. Now, their king was gone, and there was no clear successor. Alexander's half-brother was alive, but many believed he was not capable of ruling such a vast empire. Alexander also had an unborn son, but an empire could not wait for a child to grow up. The generals faced a difficult choice. Who should rule? At first, they tried to maintain unity. They claimed they would govern together, but ambition soon took over. Each general controlled soldiers, each general controlled territory, and each general wanted power. The alliances did not last. Arguments became rivalries. Rivalries became wars. The men who had once fought side by side now fought one another. Slowly, Alexander's empire began to break apart. Egypt became one kingdom. Macedonia became another. Large parts of Asia fell under different rulers. The United Empire disappeared within a generation. The world Alexander had created no longer existed. It was one of history's greatest ironies. Alexander had defeated powerful kings. He had conquered enormous territories. He had overcome impossible obstacles. Yet he had never solved one simple problem. What would happen after his death? The empire depended on him. Without him, the structure began to collapse. And yet, something remarkable happened. Although the empire disappeared, Alexander's influence survived. Greek culture spread across the lands he had conquered. Greek became a common language in many regions. Ideas, knowledge, and trade moved between different civilizations. Cities founded during his campaigns continued to grow. Among them was Alexandria. The city became one of the greatest centers of learning in the ancient world. Scholars gathered there. Books were collected there. Knowledge was preserved there. In many ways, Alexander's greatest legacy was not military. It was cultural. His conquests connected people who had rarely interacted before. They exchanged ideas, shared discoveries, and shaped the future together. The empire died, but its influence lived on. That is why, more than 2,000 years later, people still remember Alexander the Great, not only because of the lands he conquered, but because of the world he helped create. Yet his story leaves us with an important question. Was Alexander truly successful, or did his greatest achievement contain the seeds of its own destruction? Alexander spent his entire life moving forward. A boy. He wanted to prove that he was different. As a prince, he wanted to become greater than his father. As a king, he wanted to defeat Persia, and after Persia fell, He wanted to go beyond every border anyone had ever reached. Each victory made him stronger. Each victory made him more famous. And each victory convinced him that another one was waiting just beyond the horizon. That was both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Alexander was not remembered because he was perfect. He was remembered because he was extraordinary. He was brave, intelligent, disciplined. He could inspire exhausted soldiers to follow him across continents. He could understand a battlefield faster than most commanders. He could turn a small kingdom into a world empire. But he also had flaws. He could be ruthless. He could be proud. And sometimes, he could not control his own anger. He destroyed cities. He killed Clytus, one of his closest friends, and he pushed both himself and his army beyond their limits. That is what makes his story so fascinating. Alexander was neither a perfect hero nor a simple villain. He was both a creator and a destroyer, a visionary and a conqueror, a man capable of greatness and capable of terrible mistakes. Perhaps that is why people still debate him today. Some see him as one of history's greatest military geniuses. Others remember the suffering caused by his campaigns. Both views contain truth, because greatness often comes with a cost. Alexander teaches us an important lesson about ambition. Ambition can help us grow. It can push us beyond fear. It can help us achieve things that once seemed impossible. But ambition without limits can become dangerous. It can make success feel temporary. It can make every achievement seem too small. Alexander conquered the known world, yet he was never satisfied. There was always another river, another city, another horizon, another goal. Perhaps the greatest victory is not conquering more. Perhaps it is knowing when enough is enough. More than 2,000 years after his death, Alexander's name is still remembered. His empire disappeared, but his story survived, and maybe that is what he wanted. All along, not simply to rule the world, but to be remembered by it. So what do you think? Was Alexander the Great a hero, a conqueror, or both? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed learning English through this story, don't forget to subscribe for more historical stories told in clear and simple English. Thank you for listening. Keep learning, keep improving. And remember, great journeys are completed one step at a time. See you in the next story.